The first time I saw my family aligned against me wasn't at a holiday gathering or during some quiet intervention. It was inside an Arizona courtroom, cold enough that even the air felt judgmental. The seal of the state of Arizona hung behind the judge, the lights buzzed overhead, and the wooden benches creaked as if the whole room wanted to make sure I didn't forget where I was. My mother sat in the second row, spine rigid as a verdict. My father gripped the bench as if he were holding the story together. Claire leaned forward with that polished, practiced pity she used when she wanted power. And Evan stared at the floor, jaw tight, refusing to look at me. Their attorney, Gregory Stanton, stood in a navy suit too perfect to trust, flipping through my file with the confidence of a man who believed the hearing was merely a formality. To him, I wasn't a person. I was a case, one tied to a vast number. I sat alone at the respondent's table, binder in front of me, fingertips pressing so hard into the wood I could feel the grain. The bailiff called, "All rise." Judge Miriam Cole entered, silver hair, sharp eyes, the kind of presence that made even the walls hold still. She glanced at the docket, then lifted her gaze. "Counsel for the petitioners?" "Gregory Stanton, Your Honor." "And for the respondent?" Her eyes locked onto mine. This was the moment they counted on me staying silent, minor compliant, letting someone else speak for me the way they had planned for months. Instead I stood. The binder felt heavier than it should have. My voice steadied only because I refused to let it break. "Your Honor, I am Maya Ellison, and I'll be speaking for myself." A ripple moved through the room like a sudden shift in weather. My mother's hand flew to her throat. My father stiffened. Claire's eyebrows jerked upward. Stanton blinked, caught off guard for the first time. "And before we go any further, let me ask you something. Have you ever had the people closest to you treat you as if they know better simply because it benefits them? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And subscribe because what my family tried next. You won't want to miss it." 3 weeks before that courtroom, everything started with a soft scrape against my apartment door. A thick envelope slid inside like a forgotten flyer. But the red stamp on the front stopped me cold. "Urgent? Coconino County Court." My hands were already shaking before I tore it open. 35 pages spilled out, dense and clinical. At the top, "Petition for guardianship and conservatorship of Maya Ellison." It felt like reading a script someone else had written for my life. Respondent exhibits impaired judgment, difficulty understanding financial risk, requires supervised decision-making. They weren't describing me. They were describing the version of me that made their plan easier. Not the woman who'd paid rent on time for 7 years. Not the financial analyst trusted with reviewing portfolios. Not the person who once caught an error that saved her firm $600,000. I flipped to page 3. My parents' signatures. Page 4. Claire's. Ink pressed into paper like fingerprints on a knife. Then came the section that explained everything. The Ellison Trust, estimated at $4.2 million, is at risk due to respondents' cognitive limitations. Cognitive limitations. The same brain they dismissed was the one they had relied on every time they needed help understanding their own finances. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. "We're doing this for your own good. You'll understand someday." I didn't respond. I just sat there on the hallway carpet, the petition open on my lap, the quiet ringing louder than any argument we had ever had. And that was the moment I finally understood something that had been growing in the shadows for years. Somewhere along the way, I stopped being their daughter. I became their opportunity. And they were counting on me being too quiet to stop them. The day my grandfather's will was read in Santa Fe didn't feel like a turning point at first. The sky was too bright, the heat too soft for late autumn, and I remember thinking the weather didn't match what was coming. I walked into the law office alone, coffee cooling in my hand, passing my parents' stiff silhouettes and Claire's confident posture as she scrolled her phone like she already knew her portion. Evan tapped his foot against the carpet, the only sign anyone else in the room felt anything at all. When Mr. Holloway called us inside, the air shifted into a silence that felt practiced, like everyone had already rehearsed how they wanted to appear. The conference room was small, lined with shelves of legal books whose spines leaned like tired shoulders. Mr. Holloway opened a thin, meticulous folder and began with the minor bequests. An envelope for my parents, the Taos cabin for Claire, and 1 year of tuition assistance for Evan. Each name spoken was a pebble dropped into still water. Small ripples, nothing more. But then he turned to the final page. To my granddaughter Maya Rose Ellison, he read. I leave the Ellison Trust, consisting of land holdings, investment portfolios, and life insurance proceeds. Current estimated value: approximately $4.2 million. The room didn't gasp, it froze. My mother's spine locked. My father blinked hard, recalibrating. Claire snapped her head up so fast her earrings swung like tiny pendulums. And Evan looked directly at me. Not jealous, not angry, just startled, as if he suddenly saw me in a different light. Then Mr. Holloway unfolded a handwritten note. She sees patterns where others see noise. That is enough. My throat tightened. It didn't sound like a blessing. It sounded like a responsibility he knew only I would understand. The meeting ended abruptly. Chairs scraped back. No congratulations. No nods of pride. My parents hurried out the door, whispering urgently. Claire lingered a moment, resting her hand on my shoulder the way someone touches a railing. Steady, thoughtful, calculating. 2 weeks later, the calculation hit my inbox. Subject: family discussion mandatory. Attached: a 26-page document titled Financial Stability Agreement. I printed it at work. The pages curled slightly as they exited the machine, like even the paper knew what it contained wasn't right. The language was dressed in kindness but sharpened underneath. I would sign over complete control of the trust into a joint family account. My parents and Claire would manage all our assets. I would receive a fixed allowance, just enough to live, never enough to choose. That evening, snow thawed in streaks along the road as I drove to my parents' house in East Flagstaff. The living room smelled like lemon cleaner and careful intentions. My mother filled oversized wine glasses but avoided my eyes. My father stood near the entryway, hands in pockets, waiting for something to go wrong. Claire arrived last, carrying a binder and wearing the expression of someone about to present a quarterly report. She slid the binder toward me. Maya, she said, this is the safest way for everyone. You won't have to worry about anything anymore. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed outside. My mother folded and unfolded a napkin until it resembled a worn piece of paper. I read the agreement. Every clause tightened in the same direction. Their authority, my compliance. My heartbeat stayed steady, almost too steady, like my body was preserving all its strength for the word I already knew I'd say. I'm not signing this. My father exhaled sharply. My mother's face pinched inward. Fragile but also irritated. Claire closed the binder. Not gently but with a sharp snap that announced the end of pretending. Later, I would replay that moment again and again, realizing the truth. They hadn't come to ask. They came expecting obedience. And my refusal was the first crack in a structure they'd spent weeks, maybe months building. I left the house without the binder. Snow had begun falling again. A thin layer of white tracing every step behind me. Not hiding footprints but revealing them. Somewhere in those tracks was the moment my family decided I wasn't capable of owning my own life. And somewhere in my own footprints was the moment I decided I would prove them wrong. The night Claire knocked on my apartment door, the air inside felt too still, like the walls already knew what she'd come to take. I was halfway through folding laundry when I heard 3 soft taps. Precise practice, the exact rhythm she'd used since we were kids. I froze, a shirt slipping from my hands. Only someone with an agenda would knock like that. When I opened the door, Claire stood in the hallway with a canvas tote bag hanging from her shoulder, dressed in a calm expression that didn't match the tension tightening her jaw. She stepped inside without waiting for me to offer, her eyes sweeping over my living room as though taking inventory of a life she expected to soon manage. She set the tote on the coffee table with a quiet, deliberate thud. Then she pulled out a stack of thick papers. Fresh prints, corner-clipped, labeled. Not drafts. Finished documents. Maya, she began, her voice coated in gentle concern. We just want to help. I didn't answer. She took that as permission to continue. She pushed the stack toward me. I picked up the top page. Temporary protective appointment. Petitioner's authority. At the bottom was a signature line. Not mine. Claire's, already filled in. You filed this? I asked. No, she said quickly, too quickly. Not yet. But Mom wants to first thing Monday morning. I'm trying to give you the chance to cooperate before it gets formal. Formal. That word landed like a lock clicking into place. She slid onto the couch, folding her hands neatly as if we were in a meeting room and I was the only one behind schedule. This is easier for everyone, she continued. It's temporary. Just until things settle. I flipped through the pages. Each clause was another step designed to shrink my life. Transfer medical decisions, financial authority, access to accounts, even approval for independent travel. They were planning to decide if I could leave town. They were planning to arrange everything. This isn't protection, I said. It's control. Claire's face twitched. Not guilt, not hesitation, just irritation. Like she was dealing with someone being unreasonable. You're overreacting, she said. You've always struggled with balance. You know you get overwhelmed. Grandpa never should have put that trust entirely in your hands. We're trying to prevent a disaster. What disaster? The inevitable kind, she replied, crossing her arms. You're not equipped for this. There it was, the sentence she'd been waiting years to say. It didn't cut because it was new. Cut because it was familiar. Before I could respond, my phone buzzed on the table. Claire glanced at the screen. She didn't even try to hide the knowledge on her face. She's downstairs, she said. Mom. Dad too. We thought it'd be easier if I came up first. My breathing went still. They weren't here to talk. They were here to collect. No, I said quietly. I'm not doing this. Claire straightened. Maya. Be reasonable. If you don't sign voluntarily, the court will grant the emergency appointment. Then we have immediate authority. No hearing. No delay. She said it like a fact, not a threat. Like the wheel was already turning and I was simply in its path. I stood and walked to the door. Leave, I said. Maya, come on. Leave. She hesitated, studying me as if searching for a weak point she'd somehow missed. Then she collected her tote bag, her expression shifting to something colder and more strategic. As she stepped into the hallway, she didn't look angry. She looked prepared. After she disappeared down the stairs, I shut the door, locked it, and pressed my back against it. For a long moment, the only sound in the apartment was my heartbeat, loud and steady like a warning drum. Then I started moving. Not with a plan. Not yet. Just with instinct. I opened my laptop. I pulled every document I had, employment records, bank statements, lease agreements, performance reviews. I organized them into folders, labeled them, and backed them up to an encrypted drive. Screens reflected the rapid rise of tabs and windows as I built the first defense they never expected me to have. They weren't preparing to take guardianship. They were acting as though they already had it. And the summons I'd received the week before wasn't a beginning. It was a countdown. When I finished scanning the last page, I looked at the stack Claire had brought, still sitting on my coffee table like a threat that hadn't decided what shape it wanted to take. My hands were steady now. My breathing is even. I wasn't afraid the way they counted on me to be. If they were going to rewrite my life on paper, then I would give the court something ink could not distort: truth, pattern, evidence. And when the hearing came, the story would not be the one they planned. It would be mine. The 48 hours after Claire left my apartment were too quiet. Quiet in that uncanny way where the world seems to inhale before something breaks. My building's hallways felt colder, the winter light sharper. Yet my mind kept circling the same truth. If they were willing to show up at my door, they were willing to go further. So I did what Grandpa had always taught me: start with the facts, not the fear. I laid every document I owned across my dining table. employment records, tax filings, lease agreements, performance reviews, and bank statements. The table transformed into a map of my independence, proof that I existed as a functioning adult, no matter how they tried to rewrite me on paper. But the most crucial folder was the one I hadn't opened in months, labeled in my handwriting, Ellison Trust Original Documents. Inside, beneath trust agreements and legal addenda, was a thin envelope, Grandpa's handwritten letter. I slipped it out gently, unfolded the creased lines. Maya, there may come a time when people you love try to take what they believe they deserve. If that day comes, don't argue with them. Just keep the records. Truth has a way of defending itself. His handwriting was careful and steady, as if he knew I would need it one day. I read the letter twice, then set it aside and continued through the rest of the folder. Near the bottom, I found something I hadn't examined closely before. A set of bank statements from the final year of Grandpa's life. Most of the withdrawals were small and consistent in amount. But then two entries caught my eye. Both large, both identical, both just days apart. My stomach tightened. Grandpa had been hospitalized during that exact period. He couldn't walk. He could barely hold a pen. Yet the statement showed in-person withdrawal, verified by signature. I compared the signatures side by side. The difference wasn't apparent to someone untrained, but to me, someone who notices patterns without trying, it was glaring. The slant was too controlled. The pressure is too even. The loops are too heavy. They weren't his. Not even close. Someone had signed for him. Someone who shouldn't have. A cold clarity spread through me. Not shocked. Not panic. Something quieter and sharper. Evidence forming its first shape. I scanned the statements, labeled them potential fraud pending review, and added them to the encrypted drive. Just as I finished uploading, my phone buzzed with a message from Evan. Can we meet? Tomorrow morning? Please. It's important. Evan rarely intervened in anything. If he reached out, something was wrong. The next morning, Flagstaff air cut straight through my coat as I walked into a small diner off Route 66. The windows fogged from the heat inside, giving everything a blurred softness that didn't match the tension in my chest. I slid into a booth. Evan arrived minutes later, hood up, shoulders hunched, eyes darting toward the door as if afraid someone might follow him. He didn't even take off his coat before sitting. Maya, they're not stopping, he said immediately, voice low and raw. What did they tell you? He swallowed. Mom said, once the petition goes through, they can move everything into a family management account. She told me my tuition would be covered again if I stayed out of it. And what did you say? I said I didn't want money that came from lying. His hands trembled as he reached into his backpack. He placed a small flash drive on the table between us, as it weighed as much as the truth itself. They used my laptop, he whispered. They said they needed old photos of you for context. But then they had me upload school reports, doctor's notes, anything that made you look incapable. I didn't know what it was for until I saw the petition. My heart clenched, not in anger at him, but at the thought of my family using the one gentle person among us to do their dirty work. What's on the drive? I asked. Emails, he said. Screenshots. Drafts. Plans. Everything. Back at the diner table, I opened my laptop and plugged in the drive. The screen filled with folders and timestamps. Long email chains between my parents and Claire, outlining exactly how they intended to build the case. One email read, collect anything that reinforces incapacity. Medical files, old IEP documents, meltdown photos, whatever helps the narrative. Another, we need to emphasize her emotional volatility. Ensure that you frame it in a long-term perspective. And then the final one, sent at nearly midnight 2 weeks earlier. If she won't sign, we push the emergency filing. No more warnings. We take control before she realizes we can. I exhaled slowly. The image of Claire standing in my apartment, telling me to be reasonable, clicked into place like a puzzle piece that always belonged. I'm sorry, Evan whispered. I didn't know how to stop them sooner. You're stopping them now, I said. That matters. For the first time since this began, I didn't feel alone. Someone else had seen the truth and refused to be part of the lie. When I returned home, I transferred every file from the flash drive into my evidence folders, labeling each chain, each screenshot, each timestamp. Then I organized them into a timeline, clean, precise, undeniable. This wasn't just a guardianship petition. It was a deliberate and coordinated attempt to seize control. And now, I had their blueprint. In the dim light of my apartment, surrounded by proof they never expected me to have, I felt the balance shift. Not all at once, but enough for me to breathe differently. If they wanted to drag me into court with a story they built out of fear and entitlement, then fine. I would walk into that courtroom carrying the one thing their narrative couldn't survive, the truth they tried to bury. And the moment the judge saw it, everything would begin to break. The morning of the hearing didn't feel real. Snow clung to the edges of the sidewalk outside my apartment, the sky pale and washed out like a blank page waiting for someone to write over it. I packed my folders slowly, red for trust documents, blue for employment records, yellow for correspondence evidence, and black for the newly labeled fraud files. Each one clicked into my bag with a certainty I didn't feel in my chest. But they were steady, and for today that had to be enough. The Flagstaff courthouse buzzed with the quiet chaos of too many lives crossing at once. Families whispering, lawyers speed-walking, the stale scent of old carpet and winter coats. I passed security, climbed the stairs, and pushed open the door to courtroom 2A. My family was already there. My mother sat ramrod straight, hands folded tightly like she was praying for an outcome she'd already decided was deserved. My father leaned back stiffly, jaw working, shoulders squared. Claire whispered to him, expression smooth, confident, too confident. And Evan, at the end of the row, stared at his shoes, shoulders curved inward, the shape of guilt and fear pressed together. I took my seat at the respondent's table, laying out my binders with the same precision I used every time someone tried to underestimate me. Their attorney, Gregory Stanton, adjusted his glasses and offered a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. To him, I was just another case to win, another set of documents to dismiss. All rise. Judge Miriam Cole entered, her presence immediately shifting the air. She didn't posture. She didn't soften. She simply was, and everyone reacted. She settled into her chair and looked over the docket. Case of Ellison versus Ellison. Petition for guardianship and conservatorship of Maya Rose Ellison. Her voice had the clean edge of someone who had already seen too many families tear themselves apart in this exact room. Mr. Stanton, she said, you may proceed. He rose with rehearsed ease. Your Honor, he began, this petition is a matter of protection. Ms. Ellison's long-standing developmental disorder, combined with her challenges in managing complex assets, places both her safety and the integrity of the Ellison Trust at risk. I watched him present their narrative like a polished slideshow. Old-school reports, selective medical summaries, carefully chosen photographs, each one pulled from the very files Evan had warned me about. He shaped them into a story about fragility, instability, and incompetence. A story they wanted the court to believe more than they wanted it to be true. When he finished, Judge Cole turned to me. Ms. Ellison, your response. I stood, taking only the red binder at first. My fingers didn't shake now. My voice didn't quiver. Everything inside me aligned into a single sharp line. Your Honor, I said, before we discuss my capability, I'd like to start with accuracy. I stepped toward the bench and handed her the original trust documents. Exhibit A. The irrevocable trust my grandfather executed. Sole trustee me. No co-trustees. No oversight board. His signature verified. And the interdict clause preventing modification. Judge Cole examined the pages, flipping slowly. Stanton shifted uncomfortably. Next, I opened the black binder. Exhibit B. Bank records from the last year of my grandfather's life. I laid the statements in front of her. These two withdrawals, I said, tapping them, were recorded as in-person transactions requiring live signatures. But during this period, my grandfather was fully hospitalized. He could not walk. He could not sign. And the signatures do not match his verified sample. They do, however, match each other. Same pressure pattern. Same artificial symmetry. Stanton stood abruptly. Objection, this line of, "Sit down, Mr. Stanton," Judge Cole said without looking at him. A tremor went through my family. My mother's hand froze midair. Claire's face paled one shade, then another. I lifted the yellow binder, the one with the emails. Exhibit C. Internal communications between the petitioners. I placed printed chains and screenshots on the bench. These include drafted statements designed to exaggerate my limitations, instructions to collect childhood medical files for the purpose of reinforcing incapacity, and an email dated 2 weeks before the petition was filed. I slid the final page to the front. It read, "If she won't sign, we push the emergency filing. No more warnings. We take control before she realizes we can." Judge Cole read each line in silence. The courtroom did not breathe. When she finally looked up, there was no ambiguity in her expression. It had sharpened into something cold and exact, judicial, yes, but also deeply human. "Mr. Stanton," she said, "would you like to explain the forged signatures? Or the coordinated effort to manufacture evidence? Or the intent to circumvent due process?" He opened his mouth, closed it, then swallowed hard. "No, Your Honor," he managed. Judge Cole folded her hands. "This petition is not supported by fact. It is supported by manipulation. It weaponizes a developmental diagnosis in a manner this court finds reprehensible." My mother's face crumpled. My father looked away. Claire's breath stuttered in her throat. And Evan finally lifted his eyes toward me. "The petition for guardianship is denied," the judge said. "Dismissed with prejudice. Sanctions will follow." The gavel fell with a single decisive strike, the sound of a door closing behind the version of my life they tried to force on me. But as it echoed through the courtroom, I realized something else. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a life they no longer had the right to touch. In the days after Judge Cole's gavel fell, silence settled over my life in a way that felt almost unreal, like the world paused just long enough for me to breathe again. My apartment no longer felt like a battlefield. The binders stacked on my dining table felt less like armor, and more like proof that I had survived something no one should ever have to face. But silence after a storm doesn't mean peace. It means the debris is finally visible. The first crack in my family's plans didn't come from them. It came from the mail. A plain white envelope sat in my mailbox 3 days after the hearing, stamped with my parents' address in East Flagstaff. I almost tossed it aside, assuming it was another attempt to contact me indirectly. But it wasn't from them. It was from their mortgage lender. "Notice of delinquency," the letter read. "Second warning. Foreclosure review pending." I stared at the page, the words sinking in with slow, heavy clarity. Without access to my trust, without the guardianship, they couldn't cover the refinancing they'd taken out last year. They had stretched themselves thin long before trying to stretch control over my life. The consequences had been coming. The hearing only exposed them. That evening, Evan texted, "You should know they're blaming you. Mom's crying. Dad's furious. Claire hasn't left her apartment all day." I typed back, "Are you safe?" He answered almost instantly, "Yes. I'm staying with a friend. I just didn't want you to hear this from them." Then a few minutes later, "But you didn't ruin anything. I heard them arguing with the bank before all this even started." I set the phone down. Not with relief. With confirmation. 3 months earlier I had wondered why they pushed so hard, so quickly, so aggressively. Now I knew. They weren't protecting me from the trust. They were protecting the trust from collapsing under their own debt. 2 more days passed before the subsequent fracture hit. This time it wasn't passive. It wasn't accidental. It was an email from Claire's husband, someone who had always hovered in the background of family gatherings, polite but unremarkable. For short sentences, "Maya, I've filed for divorce. Claire hid over $200,000 in credit card debt from me. Most of it is tied to trust-related expenses. I'm sorry for everything. I read it twice, then a third time, not out of satisfaction, but because of the bitter clarity running through it. Everyone who had tried to control my life was losing control of their own. That afternoon my phone lit up again, this time with a name I hadn't seen since before the hearing. Mom, we need to talk. Please call. I stared at the screen until it dimmed. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, not out of cruelty, but because I finally understood something essential. If someone uses your voice against you, silence becomes a boundary, not a punishment. But the universe didn't just give me distance. It gave me direction. That same evening, I received an email from a nonprofit I had reached out to when everything first began. An organization supporting autistic adults navigating financial independence and family overreach. I had filled out their intake form weeks ago, hoping for resources. Instead, they offered me a position. Your lived experience and your financial background would be invaluable. Would you be interested in helping us develop new advocacy workshops? I reread the email slowly, feeling something in my chest shift. Not triumph, but a sense of alignment. For the first time in months, a door opened that wasn't built on someone else's expectations. I made tea. I sat at my table, and then I opened a new document. Title: The Ellison Integrity Fund Articles of Incorporation. It felt strangely full circle, using my grandfather's trust, the very thing my family had tried to weaponize, as the foundation for something he would have understood immediately. Protecting people who were underestimated, misrepresented, or cornered by those who claimed to love them. I outlined programs: financial literacy coaching, evidence-gathering guidance, support for adults facing guardianship abuse, scholarships for certification exams. It wasn't revenge. It was reclamation. Later that night, I stepped onto my apartment balcony. Flagstaff's air cut clean and cold against my face. Snow dusted the rooftops below, soft but certain. My phone buzzed again. Evan, I'm proud of you. I hope someday the others understand. But if they don't, it's not your burden. I closed my eyes, letting the wind settle around me. He was right. Everything they lost in the aftermath, the house, the marriages, the illusions, those weren't my consequences. Those were theirs. And for the first time, I didn't feel the need to carry any of it. The life ahead of me was mine now. Uncontested, unedited, and finally unfolding in the direction I chose. Winter loosened its grip on Flagstaff slowly, first in the way the snow thinned along the streets, then in the way daylight stayed a little longer each evening. Life didn't snap back into place after the hearing. It unfolded cautiously, reshaping itself around the space I had finally reclaimed. The first morning I woke without dread sitting on my chest. I brewed coffee and realized, almost with surprise, that the air in my apartment felt warm again. Not physically, emotionally. It no longer felt like a bunker. It felt like a beginning. A month after the verdict, I drove north toward the foothills where I'd rented a small office space for what would soon become the Ellison Integrity Fund. The building was modest. 2 rooms, tall windows, sunlight that spilled across the floor in soft golden strips. The sign above the door hadn't been installed yet. Just an empty wooden frame waiting for a name I finally believed I had earned. Inside, the space was clean and quiet. 2 desks. A bulletin board. A small shelf where I placed Grandpa's old trust ledger. Not as a symbol of trauma, but as a reminder of the clarity and steadiness he had always trusted in me. By February, the first client walked through my door. A young woman in her 20s. Autistic. Terrified. Her aunt was trying to take over her disability benefits. Her voice trembled with every apology. Sorry for bothering you. Sorry I talk slow. Sorry if this doesn't make sense. I guided her to sit. I offered her water. And then I said the words I wish someone had once said to me. You don't have to shrink to be protected here. Her shoulders loosened. Her breathing steadied. And when she finally told me her story, she didn't apologize once. Helping her track communication, gather evidence, and build a plan didn't feel like work. It felt like recovery, mine and hers. More clients came in the weeks that followed. A veteran whose sister drained his disability checks. A college student coerced into signing over her bank account. A young man whose parents threatened to take guardianship to access his settlement. Different backgrounds. Different struggles. The same pattern. People underestimated because their minds work differently. Every file I opened confirmed what I already knew. My story wasn't unique. And each time I helped someone navigate the maze meant to trap them, I felt something inside me settle. Not triumph. Alignment. Purpose. One evening as I reorganized case files, my phone buzzed. Evan. He sent a photo. Open fields north of Flagstaff, a ranch gate in the foreground, sunlight hitting snow-dusted grass. Working here now, he wrote. It's hard work, but real. I think it's good for me. Then another message followed a few moments later. If you ever need help with your workshops or anything, I want to be part of what you're doing. I read his message slowly, letting the warmth of it land without rushing. My reply was simple. When you're ready, the door's open. Healing wouldn't come from the center of our family, that much was clear. But sometimes healing starts at the edge, with the one person brave enough to step out first. As for my parents and Claire, distance naturally settled between us. Not sharp, not hostile, quiet. A quiet that protected me more than any spoken boundary could. Public records indicated that the house foreclosure was moving forward. Claire relocated to a small apartment in Tempe. My parents entered a debt consolidation plan. None of those updates came from them. They came from Evan, gently, softly, without expectation. I didn't celebrate their losses, but I didn't carry them either. Those consequences were born from their choices, not mine. By spring, the air warmed enough that I drove south to the land parcel near Oak Creek, the one tied to Grandpa's trust. The couple leasing it for their startup orchard greeted me with updates, spreadsheets, and plans for irrigation. They didn't treat me like a fragile trustee. They treated me like a professional. Walking among the young apple trees, I breathed in the faint scent of new growth. And for the first time, I didn't think of the trust as a burden or a battleground. I saw it as something living, something that could grow the way I finally could. When the wind swept across the field, I closed my eyes, not to escape, but to mark the moment. The moment I knew my life no longer moved around fear or secrecy, or the expectations of people who mistook control for love. My grandfather once said, "You measure strength by what you protect, not what you control." Standing in that orchard, independent, unguarded, unafraid, I finally understood what he meant. I wasn't protecting money. I wasn't protecting a title. I wasn't even protecting my past. I was protecting the right to live fully, truthfully, and loudly in the shape that was mine alone. And for the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building, growing, becoming. This life, this quiet, steady, chosen life, was the one they tried to take from me. But it's the only one I was ever meant to have.